Ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Randy Greenberg.
So what I'm not going to talk to you about today is the creative aspect. I'm not going to talk to you about how to change the arc of a character, or how to make the character better, or how to interact with the characters, or add love scenes, or put car chases in. I'm not going to talk to you about any of that. That's a totally different subject that's subjective to every person you talk to and every person you try to sell something to. What I'm going to talk to you today is about the business aspect of being a producer. So this is what you all think of when you think of a producer. It's what you all think of. You think of this, there's parties, there's the big house, there's the Bentley, I'm going to premieres with the Entourage group. This is what you think about when you think about being a producer. What I have to tell you is it has nothing to do with that and everything to do with business. Okay? As a producer, at the same time you're doing all of this, you've got to find the right project, you've got to get the script written, you've got to get it good. You've got to find people who can be your wardrobe and costumes and set decorators and art design and locations. You've got to find all of that and make it all work. You've got to put a budget together. You've got to find your financing. That's what a producer does. It's not that. That's the fun part if you ever get there. So there are two types of producers. Are you what you would call, or have heard for years, as the independent producer, which Bill Mechanic said years ago is not the independent producer. You are dependent on everybody to get something made. Or are you a studio producer? Now, the difference is, there's only slight differences. Every producer is, do you want to work for free? Do you love being on roller coasters? Do you love rejection? Do you love having your phone calls never returned? Can you pay the rent without getting paid? And do you have 5 years to wait? That is, with a producer, whether you're dependent or a studio, for most part, that's the way it works. Now, a studio producer, all they've got on you is they're related to somebody who's in a senior level exec at a studio. They either, or their best friends, ex-wives, current husband, whatever, is an A-list talent. Or they manage, represent, produce, or own one of the top 20 books, authors, IP creators in the world. That's who gets a studio deal and winds up as a studio producer, unless you've made multi-pictures that have made over $100 million, and then you can get a studio deal. But before you get the studio deal, you're still a dependent producer. So that's the difference. And the first thing you have to worry about is, what am I going to make? Where do I find it? Is it a script? Is it a book? Is it a brand? Is it a franchise? Is it a toy? Is it a video game? Is it a comic book? Is it a graphic novel? Magazine article? Autobiographical? Internet sensation? The Fred movies that are being done at Nickelodeon? It's off of an internet sensation. So what is it? Where did you find it? And for the most part, financiers, studios, and distributors today want it to be a recognizable brand. Something that someone already knows about. Because they're all lazy, and all of us are lazy as consumers, that we don't want to dig for information anymore, and we don't want to take a chance. If we're going to pay $10 on a ticket, I better know that I'm at least going to get my money's worth. That's why Transformers works, or next year Battleship, or the Ouija board if Hasbro can get that off. You're interested in it, and you'll leave going, oh, that was all right. But if it's a movie, called, Dish for Dessert, you don't know anything about it, and you leave and you don't like it, you want your money back. But as a brand, you have a little more cushion to be bad. So I'm going to go a little further into this. This is the studio philosophy about making movies. And as a producer, you need to know this. Okay? Because if you want a studio to distribute your pictures, and you do, you don't want to self-distribute. It's a fallacy. It's not a good idea yet. Okay? The studios are into brand-heavy product mix, maximizing franchises, and they're always looking for off-balance sheet financing. And that's just because the bottom line is they don't have enough money to make movies either. So let's look at brands first, right? Anybody see, well this one's not out yet, anybody see Fast 5 this year? Okay, $600 million later, a lot of people saw Fast 5, okay? A lot more than saw the previous movies. It's the biggest franchise that Universal has. They're now looking to do Fast 6 and Fast 7, and either the cars are going to be 15-year-old jalopies by that time, or the actors are. But they're going to shoot them back to back. And obviously, this is, you know, the big bad movie from Summit that just is the cash rate. For them, it just keeps making the money. And this was the independent movie that everybody wants, right? This was an independent movie. It was made for less than $20 million, the first one, and is a massive sensation. This is what every dependent producer wants to have. So then the studios also do event films, Transformers, Harry Potter, all event films. Massive $200+ million pictures that really justify the existence of the studios. The brand group gets in there, the licensing group is in there, merchandising, promotions, marketing, everybody's involved. And then the studios are also looking at smaller portfolio pictures. Bad Teacher is arguably an independent movie done in a studio. That movie was made for $24-some-odd million, and Cameron Diaz took $1 million salary. It's not what she's going to make off of it, but that's what she took to get the movie made. In the end, she'll probably take home $20 or $25 million because her back end is significant. The movie's done over $200 million worldwide, and it's just come out on video, and the DVD numbers are really big. The Bridesmaids, again, $30+ million picture, was made for the crossover potential of date night. That not just women would go to see it, but that men would find it accessible because it had crude humor and language in it. So it was done as a crossover potential, and again, largest R-rated comedy, female comedy out there. Then the studios are also creating and extending their libraries. Right? Johnny English came out 8 years ago, and yesterday, the second one came out, and arguably this weekend it'll do probably $5 million domestically. But the movie's hit $100 million outside the States. They didn't make it for the US. They made it because Rowan Atkinson is a huge actor, huge star outside the States. Puss in Boots is an offshoot, obviously, of... Thank you. And then Harold and Kumar, obviously the third one. We had to wait for one of our stars to get out of the White House before he could make it. The Muppets trying to be resurrected again. The Three Musketeers, in public domain, anybody could make it. So we've got Summit releasing it in a couple of weeks, and then Alvin and the Chipmunks. And what it does is it rejuvenates the studio libraries. It makes the previous movies worth more money in DVD and in television and in digital download. And it refreshes the catalog, keeps those brands new. Some of the studios are also doing local language or regional productions. 20th Century Fox, Warner's, and Universal are the only 3 studios that have local language or acquisitions groups that will pick up local language or local product. Some of the other studios will do it on an ad hoc basis, but these are the only 3 studios that do it as a business. They literally have their own divisions that are acquisitions or local productions. And Warner's distributed one of the biggest French movies this year, and it did somewhere around $60 million at the French box office. So we're not talking about small movies either. We're talking about what could arguably be the biggest local language movie of the year. So, and the reason I tell you that is because you're not all American. English is not necessarily your first language, and this industry is a global industry. Make no mistake about it. Now, this is a really old slide, but I love bringing it out, and if Nielsen EDI would actually make a new one, I'd use it. But this is a great pie graph to show you where material comes from. So is it a comic book, is it a game, is it a brand, where does it come from? This is up until a few years ago, obviously 5 years ago, this was what in 2006 had been the makeup of the top movies. It's arguably probably not much different now, although comic book movies probably make up a greater slice, and original spec scripts are probably just a little bit smaller than that. But as you can see, the movies come from everywhere. So let's move on to the production business. Okay? It's all about contracts. Because in the end, whether you make a good movie or a bad movie, if you want to sell that movie and distribute that movie, you have to do a contract with a distribution organization, and before you can do that contract, all of your other contracts have to be in place, which includes your deal with the production, all the financing, all the talent, all your key members, and arguably all the way back to who wrote the original piece. It's a lot of work. So the first thing I'll tell you is never, ever, ever do a contract that's between yourself and someone else. Make a legal entity so that you're not at risk. Does everybody understand that? Because if you're at risk, your personal life is at risk. Your money, your spouse's money, your family's money, any insurance policies, your home, your car is all at risk. Make a legal entity that then becomes your production entity or the entity for the production. Two different things. You could have I could have Randy Greenberg Producer Inc., which is my entity, but then I could have Cowboys and Aliens LLC as the production entity. A much better idea than having all the deals be with Randy Greenberg, which wouldn't work. So, when you acquire something, you have to either do an option or an acquisition agreement for the underlying script, or if you're going to, somebody has a really great idea, or they've written an LA Times article or an LA Weekly article, and you're interested in purchasing that and making that into a movie, you need to do a deal with that writer. You need to deal with that if you have a friend who's come up with a really great idea and they've put together a Ouija board or the new Rubik's Cube, and that's what you want to make into a movie. You need a contract that allows you to have the rights to make a movie out of that. Does everybody get that? Makes sense. Simple, but you'd be surprised. A lot of producers forget that, and then they try to go to financing before they ever have the rights to actually make something. So then, when you acquire something, you either need to decide, you need to make sure it's exclusively yours. So that's one of the reasons you do a contract, because if you don't have a contract, that person who you are getting the rights from could turn around and give it to somebody else who actually does a contract, and then you have nothing. So do you want to rent it or do you want to own it? Renting is cheaper than owning. Same thing in the housing market. Renting is cheaper than owning. But at some point in time, you have to own it. Then how long are you going to have it? There's always a reversion clause in your contract. At some point in time, if you don't do something with this idea, this script, this whatever it is that you have, if you don't do something with it, it goes back to the original owner. You don't get it forever. So what rights do you get? Now, and this is really important because as a producer, when you actually license to a distribution company, especially if it's a studio, the studio wants everything. They want soundtrack rights. They want theme park rights. They want play rights. They want national touring play rights. They want audio book rights. They want publishing rights. They want all the licensing and merchandising. Because if you can't deliver that, that's a reason for the studio to say, listen, I really love your project, but I don't want to buy it. Because distributing movies isn't necessarily a moneymaker today. But if they have all the other rights and they can make stuff out of it, and they can make money off of it, it's a better chance for you to sell your project to the studio. Does that make sense? Toys are a big business. If you haven't gone into Toys R Us, if you haven't looked at toys, go to Toys R Us. Just make a list of all the brands you know that have been made into movies, or that were movies before they were toys. You'll walk out with a massive list. So, and then the thresholds to production. Is the contract going to state you have to have a script that they approve, or you have to have a script by a certain date, you have to have financing by a certain date, do you have to start production by a certain date? I had a client that had a contract, an 11-year contract. Actually, it was actually 10 years. With they had a reversion clause for a year. So the owner had to actually notify my client at the end, before the end of 10 years, that they were going to take the project back or the property back. But once they did that, then my client still had 365 days to do something with it. And then in the end, all my client had to do was start 1 day of principal photography, and then they had the rights for the rest forever, in perpetuity. They didn't actually have to pay them. They just had to start principal photography. I'd argue that the underlying rights never actually would have changed hands if no money, or what lawyers call consideration, changes hands. But very important that you have a contract, that you know exactly when your reversion is and what you have to do in order to keep it from reverting back to the owner. Does that make sense? You have a quizzical look on your face. Okay. So, once you have your option where you've acquired it, you also have to have a chain of title. Because in the end, again, when you get to a distributor, the distributor wants to see all the legal paperwork, which comes from the very first person that wrote something or created whatever it is that you're doing, all the way up to the deal that they're doing with you to distribute the movie. All the T's crossed, all the I's dotted. Because, go all the way down to the bottom, injunctive relief, which is a term in a contract, is a killer. And several years ago, 20th Century Fox decided to implement that to Warner Brothers that had Watchmen. And they were months from releasing the movie. $85 million on the line for the picture. $50 million for marketing, just domestically. $135 million on the line. And 20th Century Fox raised their hand and basically said, wait a second, this was done without our approval. How the hell did you get this? We had the rights originally. And it turned out the producer, Larry Gordon, there was an issue in how he had taken it from 20th Century Fox to Warner Brothers. And in the end, what did 20th Century Fox get? They got, I think it was 7.5%, I'm not sure about this, but they got a percentage of the gross. I think it was 7.5% of the gross of the picture for doing nothing. Because they had a contractual claim. But they were about to take them to court, and they could have taken them to court and stopped the release of the picture. It's really hard to start again after you've spent $50 million and make it still seem like it's a new movie. So it's a killer. You do not want to be in that position. And I think Warner's was not happy. The movie didn't do well. But who made out the best? 20th Century Fox. Because they made a percentage of the gross without having to do anything. But they had that right, and it was in their contract. So you have to be very careful. So again, the same company, you have to have the contract from the company you sourced the material from. You need to know how long they've had it. Who did they get the rights from? If it's from a comic book, you have to have all the work for hire agreements from the artists, from the writers. Everything has to, all the T's crossed, all the I's dotted. Again, otherwise, when you go to sell your movie and the distributor's going to say, I really love your picture, but we think there's a problem with the creators. And if that means the studio has to spend more money for the creators, that means either you get less money for your movie or they pass. Because it's easier to pass. It's easier to say no. Now, financing. Where do I find my money? How am I going to get a movie actually financed? Well, here are all the sources. Okay? Equity, tax, bank advances off of foreign guarantees or foreign pre-sales, negative pickup, internet deals, download deals, talent producer or key talent deferrals, and it's either some of these or all of these or a mixture of them. This is the mix, if you will, of the capital stack. So, first one, equity. Hedge funds, wealthy individuals, brands, corporations, anybody who's willing to write them a check for a piece of the back end. There's also film investors in this community. Most of these are attached at some point in time to a studio. Bold Films has its own production, finance, and distribution organization with Odd Lot. Their foreign sales agency is called Affinity. Skydance has a deal at Paramount. That's Larry Ellison's son who runs that. Legendary Pictures and Village Roadshow at Warner's. Cross Creek was the financing group behind Black Swan. Now they have a deal. They have a deal at Universal. Relativity has 2 deals at Columbia and Universal, but obviously manage their own now through Rogue. New Regency and Dune are at Fox, And Gun Hill Road 1 and 2 were out of Relativity and Elliott, and those were at Universal and Columbia. And there's another dozen, maybe 2 dozen or so film financiers or funds that are around the entertainment business as well. And then, of course, there's the approximately 1 million plus individuals in this country or around the world who have invested in pictures before, are willing to do it again, and if you know them, are connected to them, those are people you want to hit up as well. And then finally, the newcomers to this space are brands. And what you need to remember is these brands spend collectively, most brands across the world spend collectively over $1 trillion a year marketing to all of us to buy their stuff. Well, those marketing dollars are now being moved slowly to actually being in media or owning. Gatorade did it some years ago with a soccer movie, and there are several. Dodge is considering putting money into several race car movies. You know, Ford put money into 24. So there are all sorts of opportunities with brands who are willing to spend their marketing dollars instead of just spending money in buying media, which is a sunk cost for marketers. If you can offer them the opportunity to own something with the same amount of money, where their brand is going to be highlighted and shown in a positive way and get worldwide distribution, that's something that brand marketers who control multi-million-dollar budgets are very interested in. All told, all of that equity needs to approximate approximately 25% of your budget. That's the goal that you're looking for. Then tax, soft money, and incentives, all the same stuff. This is county, state, provincial, local governments that provide dollars either upfront or in rebates to you for shooting wherever it is that they are. So this is a small list, there's many more. But Michigan used to be the big kahuna in the United States, but they capped their incentive program at about $40, $50 million now. So all told, no matter how many projects, that's all the money they'll put out. And it's all because we're living these times. The reality is that most municipalities don't have the money. The California incentive starts on July 1st at 12 midnight in 1 second, and it is finished with its $100 million allotment about 60 seconds later. Because they get all their applications in and they're done. Because there's billions of dollars worth of projects that want to stay here, and they get their applications are in and they're done within a minute. And because there's only $100 million to go out again, because California's in the red. But all of these are places to look at. Louisiana is probably one of the best now in the country because they don't have a cap, and they have 4 solid crews in just New Orleans. So 4 really good crews, actually 3 really good crews and 1 not so good. But you could do 4 movies at one time in New Orleans and have a full crew, and that's really important because you don't just want to go to the state because of the tax incentive. You need to know that when you get there, that you can employ people in the state who actually know what they're doing. Because it's one thing to say that you're a director of photography or a gaff or a rigger, but if you don't know what you're doing, then you have to fly people in from LA who know what they're doing, which costs you more money and you don't get the credit most of the time. So again, you want your target for the credits is 25%. Not every state or municipality allows that, but that's your target. And again, it's all about mixing. You got to get the right equity, the right tax, and the rest of this, and it's all got to add up to 100% of your budget. So you have to finesse that as the producer. The next one is the bank advance of foreign pre-sales or actual sales or estimates or the gap. And all of this has to be done with a bankable foreign sales agent. So Joe Blow down the street who tells you I can get $10 million in sales, if you can't take his paper to a bank that will say we absolutely believe in what Joe Blow is saying, if you can't do that, you don't want to be with Joe Blow, right? But if you go to I Am Global, or you go to Hyde Park, or Lakeshore, or Inferno, or QED, or any of those that are here, you can take their paper to a bank, and a bank will finance it somewhere between 25% and 60%, depending on the day, the hour that you're dealing with. Because banks really don't want to lend, as you know this, right? Banks don't want to lend today. If you don't need the money, they'll give you the money. But if you need the money, they don't want to talk to you. So it's unfortunately how it works. But all of these foreign sales agents are bankable by this group of banks. And this group of banks several years ago was probably 5 times bigger. But most of those banks are either out of business today, or all of those lenders for those banks are no longer at those banks. But all of these groups actually lend against foreign pre-sales or foreign estimates, again, depending on who the estimates are from. So all of that, that's actually 25, I don't know why it happened, but that's 25% as well. So now we're getting close to 75% here on our budget. So the next thing is, what you haven't done is you haven't sold domestically yet. You got a foreign sales agent, you got your tax, and you got an equity piece, but you don't have North American theatrical distribution or DVD, home entertainment, digital, or television yet. So you want to try to look for a North American deal. Now, as a producer, you have to decide whether or not you want to try to make that deal before you make the movie or after you make the movie. If you want to make that deal after you make the movie, then you got to figure out how to try to get this 25%. If you have an equity person who's willing to put up 50% of your budget, you don't need this. But the chances are your foreign sales agent is going to tell you you have to have a domestic theatrical studio or distribution deal. Otherwise, you're not going to get your foreign numbers. Does that make sense? The foreign buyers, if you've ever dealt with this, they're very sophisticated in their own markets. They know exactly what's going on. They only buy movies if it will get released theatrically. They're not interested, unless you're selling them a direct-to-DVD or a television movie, but if you're selling them a theatrical movie, they want to see it in theaters. And if you're an American producer, they want to see an American deal or a North American deal. If you can't make a North American deal, they don't want your movie. Does that all make sense? And it's very possible the contracts, I had this on another client, the contracts for the foreign sales company actually stated, we guarantee there will be a North American theatrical release on 800 screens. Now, to be able to guarantee that, one of two things is happening. Either there's somebody else guaranteeing the P&A or the marketing money and the distribution. So somebody's going to write a check at some point in time. Or the foreign sales agent has a deal where they will make sure it happens. One or the other. But somebody's going to pony up money to get in 800 screens to make sure the contractual commitment is made. Does that make sense? Which also means that as a producer, you may have to find marketing money. So again, these are the banks, same banks that do the pre-sales will also monetize a negative pickup. A negative pickup is a contract or an MG. It's a contract that basically states, when you deliver this picture, I will pay you X. So the bank will agree to finance that paper, that contract, with a bond. You'll have to get bonded by one of the film insurance companies. You'll have to get bonded. But once you do that, then the bank knows a movie will get delivered, and once that movie gets delivered, I'll get paid back. Does that make sense? Everybody understand that? Am I losing anybody? Okay. So again, a negative pickup target percentage would be 25% of your budget. Last two. So the internet or the alternative forms of distribution today, obviously there's more than this. But to be perfectly frank, any money from any of these would be a godsend today. The only real deals that are being made that mean anything from a monetary standpoint is Netflix has done some deals for television shows where they're willing to pay so much for an episode of TV. But that's the only deal so far that I've seen is with a series at a company called Media Rights Capital that has Kevin Spacey as a producer and a star in it, and they were willing to do, I think, it was a certain number of episodes, I think 30, at $1 million a piece. So maybe that will continue, but it's a lot of money for Netflix, which has stumbled quite a bit lately, and all these others to come up with. So doesn't mean it won't happen, it's just not there today. So the last thing that you would do is look for talent deferrals. And that's just really the idea that, you know, you have $1 million in for your star and you don't have enough money to cover your $6 million budget. So you're asking your star, you know, can we defer 10%, you know, $100,000 of your salary into the back end? It's a tough conversation to have, but it happens. On one of the movies that I did, we had a $20 million budget, we actually deferred $4 million between rights holder, director, all the producers, and the 3 leads. We deferred $4 million. So it's what we had to do in order to close it, because that's all the money we had. But we made the deal and got the movie made. Again, you wouldn't want to do more than 10%. After that, it starts to get, you know, your talent starts to look at you like, well, why am I doing this picture? So here's to recap. So your equity, tax, you know, bank advances on either the foreign sales numbers or the estimates or on your negative pickup, all target for 25%. If you can get all 4 of those, that's your 100% and you're ready to go. But, you know, the other 2 can give you a few more percentage points if you need it. The other thing is that if you can actually get in, if you shoot in Alaska, there's a story yesterday in the LA Times, that if you can shoot in Alaska, Alaska has a 40% rebate. And if you shoot in rural areas, you can get another 4%. So you can get 44% of your budget out of Alaska, but again, there are hoops you have to jump through. And you know, and everybody, so many people have to be from Alaska, and you have to do so much in Alaska. But 44% is a big number. I mean, it's 19% more than the 25, and all of a sudden you're looking at, you know, smaller equity or smaller advances. So it can really mean something. And then also, the Puerto Rican Film Commissioner has been floating around town the last couple of weeks. They're raising theirs as well, above 40%. But what you have to know about Puerto Rico is it's a union. It's not a right to work locale. It's all union. So all of your rates are higher to begin with. But again, if you could shoot in Puerto Rico, it's a good tax incentive as well. So finally, you get to these production contracts. This is why I say producing is a lot of contracts. So if you don't have, you either need to be an attorney or have a really great attorney who's willing to work for free until you close your financing, by the way. And then after that, it gets hopefully a flat fee within your budget. But it's a lot of contracts. The production company contract, rights, script acquisition, that's all the rights from the writer, meaning the writer has no connection to it whatsoever after you buy it. All the financing, all producers' agreements, your agreement, your buddy's agreement, all the executive producer agreements, all of those have to be in there. And you have to control all that. The entity, the production entity, has to control all of that. The completion bond guarantee, again, if you have any financing whatsoever, there's a bank involved, if there's any sort of investor involved, you're going to want a completion bond guarantee. And what that really means is if you as a producer can't make it happen, the bond company will step in, take over the production, and ensure that you finish the production, because all of your financing and all of your distribution contracts are based on the ability to exploit your picture. And then your collection account agreements, that's a third party that's unaffiliated with you. They collect all the money from the foreign sales agents, from the domestic, you know, for anybody, wherever the revenue is coming from, and they disperse it based on contract. So your banks are paid back in first line, then comes your equity, and then comes all of your talent agreements, and anybody that's got a piece of the action. So there's a third, it's like escrow when you buy a house. Everything goes to escrow. It's not the bank. It goes through a third party that's unaffiliated, and it's really just a disbursement account. Then you've got your bank-approved chain of title. Again, banks won't lend until they agree that all the I's are dotted and the T's are crossed. You've got a title search, copyright report, union agreements, talent agreements, and by the way, if you're a studio producer, the studio does all this for you. So that's why it's really good to be a studio producer, because then you can concentrate a lot more on the creative. So when does pre-production start? Well, it starts whenever you decide to make a movie and you hire a director. And you have a marketable or sellable talent attached. Because once you have that, then you can go get your financing, You can go find your tax incentive. You can go get your foreign sales agent. You can put everything together. And once you've got all that together, the chances of getting funding and getting closed are pretty significant, as long as your budget isn't really out of whack. So, in addition, obviously, your casting, department keys, who you're going to work with, who, you got to make phone calls and find out who you like, who don't you like. Again, for your tax incentives, you need to find, if you're going to Louisiana, you want to find out who's good, who's not good. Try to call other producers that have worked recently in the state or in the city, find out who they liked, who they didn't like. We had a line producer that we had in Louisiana on a picture that I made that we fired after the first 4 weeks. We knew he was embezzling from us. We couldn't figure it out. In the end, we figured out about $75,000 had been misappropriated. But we got rid of him after 4 weeks. Can you imagine what it would have been after 16? It would have been $350,000 would have gone away. You've got to be careful. You've got to call other producers you know. If they didn't work there, ask them if they knew somebody else that worked there. Oh, I had a friend who just produced 3 movies there. Call that person. They will be happy to share horror stories and good stories with you of who to hire and not to hire. So, so you definitely want to make calls. All right, let's move on to distribution. Who loves my baby as much as I do? Because in the end, that's it, right? Right? You're a producer. You're not a distributor. Right? And you basically have to hand off your baby. Right? It's kind of like your child's going to college. You hope that when they get to college, that they prosper and grow. Right? But you want to make sure that they get to the right college. So, all right, so distribution contracts. Again, here we go back, contracts again, right? There's a lot of contracts as a producer. So you've got a U.S. distribution deal, a foreign sales agent deal, with arguably you would do during financing, but it's also part of the distribution process. And then completed foreign sales agent sub-distribution contracts. What this basically means is you have a deal with a sales agent. Well, the sales agent then goes off and does deals with the local buyers, right? Sometimes there could be, the sales agent might actually have a local subsidiary in Germany or in France or in Italy or wherever, because local laws mean that they have to do certain things. So sometimes rights have to transfer to the local entity before they can be sold off to a buyer. So there's contracts of contracts of contracts of contracts. So, and it's just something to be aware of. So here's what we, for those Americans in the room, this is what we consider to be the map of the world. Okay? It's one of my favorites. Canada is largely uninhabited. Coffee comes from way down south. The people in Mexico, obviously, do our laundry and our lawns. So, I mean, this is arguably the way we think of, right, the world. Okay, but let's think of this is the way the studios look at the world. Okay? Last year, box office in North America is worth $10.6 billion. But the international box office is worth $21 billion. So can you see where the studios are at? Make a movie for the world, not for America. So let's break this apart a little bit so you can see it in a little better format here. North America is now less than half of box office. And Europe's box office is almost equal to North America. And Asia Pacific is coming up strong. That was not that big a few years ago. So here's growth. Over the last decade, domestic box office has really stayed relatively flat. It's the international box office that's grown by leaps and bounds and will continue to grow because of these territories. They call them the BRIC countries. Brazil, Russia, India, and China are the 4 biggest growth countries. The reason, this is calendar year 2010 versus 2009, the reason India was down is because in 2009 they had a producer's strike. And the box office in India was actually flat. So in 2010, the box office was down a little bit because there were fewer movies coming out because of the strike the year before. So here you go. You've got massive change in various countries and single-digit and double-digit growth. But China's box office at $1.5 billion, 5 years ago, that was several $100 million. And it just keeps growing because there's a cinema every day that opens in China. a new cinema that opens in China every day. And it's amazing. So on average, for the studios, international box office represents over 60% of your worldwide box office. So if you're making movies for America, it ain't gonna work. So here we are. Number one movie in America so far, almost at $400 million, is Harry Potter. Number one movie internationally, the same. But as you can see, there's an interesting change when you get outside the States. Animated movies, 4 of the top 10 for this year outside the States are animated movies. Right? So something to ponder about if you're making movies. Like, it's great. If you can get in, especially with the animation houses and the studios, not a bad business. And the reason I'm telling you this as a producer is you need to know the landscape you're working in. You need to understand what is it the studios are looking for. What is it the audience is looking for? What are they willing to spend their money on? Because in the end, just because you like the movie, just because you like what you're doing, doesn't necessarily mean a financier does, or in the end, a distributor does. If you can get your movie financed, but you can get no distributor to pick it up, you got a bad picker. You may have a great movie, but if nobody picks it up, then you're sitting there with a product you can't make any money off of. So you need to understand the landscape of the world you're living in. Now, in the end, this is the very top, the cream of the crop, obviously, but it filters down. So this is most of you will understand, most of you know this already, but obviously these are the 6 studios, major studios today. They control 83% of the North American box office. These are your mini majors and the rest of the distributors that are out there. The very interesting thing is, so you have 6 majors and 6 minis that control effectively 97% of your box office. 97%. There's another 100 or so here, but they're controlling less than 3 or 4% of your box office. So getting a distribution deal with Peace Arch is now gone, but Samuel Goldwyn's great, thank you very much, or Roadside Attractions or Magnolia, but the chances of it being a big hit, slim to none. Doesn't mean it can't be. It just means your chances are dwindling. But again, if you're looking for distribution and you can get it, take it. So obviously here are your mini majors with their production entities. And again, as a producer, you may be looking to sell your project before you ever start financing it. You want somebody else to finance it and really make it. You want to work for a studio. So these are the production entities, the major production entities associated with the studios. Then at the studios, here are your major production labels, right? Obviously Disney's in the brand business. That's why they bought Marvel, that's why they bought Pixar. And that's why they have the deal with DreamWorks. DreamWorks movies go through Touchstone, which was their defunct production entity from the 80s and 90s. But that's where they go through. They're not a Disney brand, it's not a Marvel brand, it's not a Pixar brand. And then at Paramount, they have DreamWorks Animation through the end of 2013. Jeffrey Katzenberg is threatening to not stay there and do his own thing. Skydance is both a production and finance entity, but it's just started and it really wants to be a production company. First movie they did was True Grit, so they've got a pretty decent track record so far. Blue Sky at 20th Century Fox is the animation group. And then Dune, Regency, Legendary, and Village Roadshow are all both production and finance groups. And then Illumination Entertainment is the group at Universal that did Despicable Me and will continue on with Seuss and Despicable Me 2. So then you have your mini majors. You have Dimension Films at the Weinstein Company. You have UA at MGM. But for the sake of discussion, MGM is a production entity and no longer a distributor, at least domestically. And then here are your other North American distributors. And for all of them in various ways they're good. It just depends on what your movie is, but you should definitely know who they are. But in Open Road being the new entity that AMC and Regal put together, the first film that came out was Killer Elite, which did okay. Not great, but did all right. And then here are your foreign sales agents. Again, the bankable ones at least. And then here are some of the other distribution outlets that are mostly either home media, home entertainment, and television related. They have some sort of theatrical distribution opportunity, but it's limited, and usually as a DVD, if you will, marketing tool only. And then there are other distributors out there, but the ones that I just showed you are really the ones that are only the reliable ones, the ones that when they send you a check, you can cash it, the ones when they send you a contract, you can believe it. So I don't talk about the smaller ones. So again, as a summarizing, as a producer, you're doing all of these things at the same time because you're trying to figure out where you're going to get all your money from. You're trying to get out what project am I going to do, and you're not going to work on one at a time. You're going to work on multiple because in the end, it's a numbers game. It's absolutely, if you work on one and you can't get that made, you work on it for 3 or 4 years, then you have to start all over again. You're effectively wasting your time. You need to be working on more projects. Then I'm going to give you just a very, very quick idea of marketing. Okay, very quick. Okay, marketing. You have to start marketing from the moment you decide what to make, because there's enough white noise out there to be in your way from the moment you start to the moment you release. So if you don't have a Twitter account, if you don't have Twitter followers, if you don't have a Facebook account, if you don't have a destination online, not that you really want a specific place where everybody comes to, but you need somewhere where you can put materials that then people can grab from. If you have an actor or an actress attached to your project, you want to be part of their fan groups. You want to reach out to their fan groups. You want to give them material. If you have a director attached, does he have Twitter? Can you use Twitter? Will he talk about it on Twitter? All of these things are important from the moment you decide what you're going to make. Because if you don't, you're already behind because every other producer is already doing that. Because if you don't do it, it's another reason you're dead. Marketing is everywhere. It's at every step of the process. From the moment you start with your idea to the moment you have a script. You know, if it's a brand, you know, does it have name recognition everywhere? If it doesn't have name recognition everywhere, where does it have name recognition? Pump it there. You know, figure out a way to get into the media in Italy if it's an Italian comic book. And then figure out a way to take the media references from Italy and get them into Europe, and then take, you know, in the rest of Europe, get the Financial Times or, you know, Screen International or somebody to write about it out of an Italian media. Then once somebody else starts writing about it, then try to bring that back to America. You've got to do everything in your power to get your project referenced and out there. So when the moment, again, from casting to director to financing, to pre-production to production, you know, is there anything here to talk about? Can I talk about the starter principle photography? Can I talk about where the sets were made? Can I talk about any of my key people? Do any of those have media savvy? Does somebody win an Academy Award? Was anybody nominated? Were they nominated for, you know, an Art Director's Award? Or they've been, whatever it is. It's, the minute information is now important because you have to be everywhere. And why is it important? And why is marketing so necessary? Because this is just a small fraction of what your audience is seeing, using, attracted to, embedded in, interacting with on a daily basis. And this is what happens on the internet every 60 seconds. we're not talking about cable, we're not talking about network television. We're talking about the white noise that every day we are bombarded with. Every 60 seconds, all of this happens and more. I didn't actually do this. I found this on this company called GoGlobe.com. It's a consulting firm actually in the Middle East. It's fabulous. This is a fabulous piece of information. 700,000 Facebook updates every 60 seconds, right? And you've got Facebook coming to your phones, right? How many of you have Facebook coming to your phones? All right, 700,000 updates And 90% of you raised your hand to tell me you had a mobile phone that had Facebook on it. Guess what that means? You're getting updates from all of your friends and all the people you really don't want to interact with on your phone every day. Every moment of every day. Your phone buzzes, it bings, it pings, whatever it's doing, it does it. You then have to go delete it, figure it out, because otherwise you take your phone out and it's got 5 Facebook messages, right? And what you really want to do is clear your inbox, right? Nobody wants to know they haven't looked at something. We have a massive amount of information coming at us every day. So as a producer, it's not just about let's buy the right TV spots anymore. It's not about make sure we have the trailer up. It's not about let's make sure we're in 3,000 plus screens. It's not about that anymore. It's not about that. You have to connect to your audience from the beginning. And the reason is because this is getting worse. This is, the moment they took this, the moment they put this together, is the moment it became obsolete and out of date. Because I'll bet you this was put together at least 3 months ago, 2 months ago. So I'll bet the 695,000 Facebook updates is probably up to 725,000 Facebook updates every minute. Right? This is what you as a producer, in order to get your project out there, talked about, and remember, this is a town of perception and not reality. So when you want your project perceived as something amazing, you got to get the buzz going. This is what's in your way of getting your buzz going. Right? So if this is in the way, you got to join them. You're not going to beat them. You got to join them. So you're part of that white noise that hopefully you bubble up enough to actually overcome all of this, to be talked about, to be buzz, and to then be the one that gets picked up. Because the fact is, again, as I said earlier, there are more than $1 trillion is being spent by marketers around the world to get into your psyche every day so that you buy a product or service from them. That includes all the movies that are being talked about, whether they're being shown on Facebook or they're new on DVD, or you walk into a Best Buy, or you're flipping on DirecTV or Warner Cable, or you turn on CBS to watch 2.5 Men, or NBC, you know, to watch one of their shows. Notice I couldn't figure out one right away. Or ABC, couldn't figure out an NBC show right away. Or you're turning on Fox for Terra Nova, or whatever, right? All of this is, you're bombarded with thousands of images of commercials, of products and services every day. So you have to market your movie at every moment, from the moment you decide what to make. This is what you need to survive and thrive. It's what you need to know to survive and thrive as a producer.